Welcome to Integrative Lawyers of the World, where we believe that lawyers can contribute and are contributing to the healing of the world. And they do this by practicing law in a new way that integrates our values, our honesty, and authenticity. Hi, I'm your host, Carrie Raleigh, and I'm very excited to introduce our guest this episode, Rhiannon Thomas from South Africa. She is an attorney, a conveyancer, a notary, and administrator of estates. She works in a firm and she has an integrative consultancy, Milkwood. And she does this all with a vision and purpose and driven to help advance integrative law. She is a wonderful member of the integrative law movement, and I'm excited to share her with you today. Hi, Rhiannon. How are you today?
Hi, Carrie. Thank you for the invitation to be here today, and I am well, thank you.
Thank you for joining us. I am so excited that you are here. We were chatting for a little bit before we started recording, and it was just such a wonderful chat. I feel bad that our guests missed out on that, but I'm sure it will continue on into our conversation. So why don't you tell me a little bit about how you incorporate integrative law into what you do?
Integrative law has always been a part of me, I think. Well, integrative practice and the journey of trying to align my work with my values is what set me on the path of being more integrated in the way that I practice, and how to bring my own personal values of kindness and love and respect, collaboration, generosity, and humor, those are some of them, into my work is what led me to integrative law. And so I think the main way that I work in an integrative way is by trying to be authentic and trying to do something within the legal system and within legal practice that is valuable and useful for the users of the legal system. And so early on, I realized that my own skills are limited, and that what I was taught at law school was limited as well. And so through my integrative legal work, I seek to expand my own skills, and then where I feel I don't have the right kind of skills or enough experience, I collaborate with people who have those skills because of their qualifications and experience and profession.
I think as you were talking there, two things jumped out at me that seem to be a very common thread with all integrative lawyers that I've interviewed so far. Authenticity and collaboration versus competition. So can we talk about, let's go into authenticity a little bit deeper. Like, what does being authentic mean to you? And then second question, why do you think it's so important for us to be authentic? I'm being paid to do a job. As long as I do a good job and get it done, do I really need to do this deep soul searching into myself? That's a question.
Yeah.
I guess I paused there without actually asking the question. So what is authenticity and why is it so important?
So for me, authenticity is about connecting with other human beings. By being a real person who comes across as more than just a label like a lawyer, is more holistic in the way that I engage with people. It allows them to be more authentic. And then through authenticity, people are allowed to say things that they might not normally have said in a situation where they feel that the person they're dealing with is just playing a role. And so that was in my very first year of my practical experience as an attorney. For the whole, I did only spend a year there because that was as much as I could manage. But for that whole year, I felt as if I was in a school play or some kind of, show, and I would dress up with this armor of the black suit and conservative shoes. I even didn't dye my hair as red as I normally did because I felt it wasn't appropriate to be very flamboyant, and tried to sort of suppress my own personality so that I could fulfill this role of what a lawyer is expected to be. But in that experience, I realized that when I dealt with people, they were not fully themselves, and they didn't tell me everything I needed to know. Sometimes in a matter, they didn't feel that they could trust me. And as soon as I started to explore what it is to be a whole person and what it is to be authentic, so that I didn't pretend that I knew everything, that I was the expert, that I was there to solve their problems, and that they, didn't know have their own solutions potentially. As soon as I stopped doing that, people opened up and people's experiences were more positive. So I think authenticity is around really knowing yourself well and being true to who you are. And it's my biggest learning this year, actually, after 20 years of legal practice, that I'm taking away with me into 2022, is that it's not about being perfect, and it's not about knowing everything, and it's not about putting on this playing a role. It's about embracing wholeness. And that does mean that sometimes I might not know the answer. Sometimes I might say the wrong thing. Sometimes I might do the wrong thing. But if it comes in an authentic way, then people feel that they're dealing with another human being rather than some kind of automaton, who's disconnected from their own humanity.
Yeah, with that, it seems the first part, being authentic and true and whole to yourself. I think when people think of authenticity, that is understood. I think that's what we all think when we think of authenticity. And then when you add on the second part of how that creates a space for others to be their true selves, but not just for them to be their true selves, but it creates a space for more sharing. And when there's more sharing, there may be more solutions coming forward, more thinking, more problem solving. And that's part, I don't know if people, a lot of times people say, oh, authenticity is important. It's something out there, it's it's an ideal, it's a personal development word that we hear. But in terms of practice and practical reason for it, not just to feel good for yourself, but there's also a positive ripple into the boardroom, into the conference room, into the courtroom, into a client meeting. And that ripple helps you address whatever is the topic being discussed at that time.
I think, I totally, that for me, it is about creating a space. So, and I know that I can only, however I do it, I'm not sure exactly how I do it, but one of the ways in which I do that, and I'm able to do that, is by being more authentic rather than trying to be what I think I ought to be. So by my own realness, but it is based in being kind and compassionate, because you can be an authentic asshole and still be authentic.
And still be an asshole. Sorry.
Yeah, and still be an asshole. So I'm not saying that authenticity is just being who you are and not being mindful of your impact in the world and your impact on other people. So authenticity for me is a more encompassing thing than just being yourself. And part of that, though, is knowing yourself really well, and then being conscious and self-aware that where things, so sometimes I can come across apparently as intimidating, but I don't see myself as intimidating. But I am aware that that is sometimes an experience that people might have of me. And so then by being more authentic and being myself and having that awareness, I can then monitor the situation to say, okay, is that what's going on? So I think it's a lot about creating space. And that's what I do in my practice, is what I feel that many lawyers have lost the art of creating space. Because if you can build that space, then things like new solutions, different ways of thinking about things, people feeling a different way happen in that space. And I'm not exactly sure how I do it. Part of it is just me and who I am as a person, and then but a lot of it is also learned skills that I've picked up from my own journey, my own years and years in therapy, doing various courses, learning about other ways of thinking and feeling, and bringing people into the space like my colleagues in Milkwood who also have skills and natural ability to create good spaces for people.
I do think it's the authenticity, like you said. I just want to say everything you said. Yes. Yes to all of it. Yes. And I was just thinking how you were saying how sometimes people have told you that you can come across as intimidating. I think with me, sometimes I can come across as short-tempered or let's just say mean. I think I'm generally a nice person, but if I go too long without food, poor customer service, where it just not just poor customer service where they're like being rude, but like how they're doing things. It just doesn't make sense how they're doing things. Like it's an inefficient way on how they're running the store, and then they're being rude and mean to you in the process. Well, then I usually meet that back. I want to take out the word usually. I sometimes meet that back to being rude and short-tempered, and when I'll like start putting them like on a cross-examination stand, and that's not helpful. And then I look at, well, how is this? I'm being able to start looking at this. Is this who I want to be? Is this who I really am? And I don't think it is. And so I guess when you're saying how you can be authentic, and we're saying being unkind, I think there's an element to that when we're being unkind, or when I'm being unkind. Usually I'm being triggered in some way. I'm not being my core self. So this is where I think when we talk a lot about it goes into looking at ourselves, knowing ourselves, and knowing when, maybe I'm a little off from myself so I can get back to my core self.
That really resonates for me. I haven't finished reading it, but I'm reading a book called Humankind by Rutger Bregman. I don't know if you've read that. Kind, yeah, Humankind. And it's a little bit of a response to the book called Sapiens by Yuval Noah Harari, or whatever his name is, who kind of puts that we're a completely self-interested species of on the planet. And in Humankind, he takes a different approach, and he says that at our core, we are collaborative, and we do care about each other, and we do want the best for each other. And so listening to you talk just about, our responses to things, because I can also get irritable and judgmental, and I'm the kind of person who thinks one of the things in my personality is that I try to find better ways of doing things. That's just part of my makeup. But then when I see things that aren't being done very well, I want to improve them. And then I get, the efficiency in a restaurant, or if there's just stuff that it could be done a lot better. And then I have to hold myself back from sort of showing them sometimes how it could be better. But recently I watched this amazing video, and I can't remember the name of the person now, on self-inquiry. And it's about stepping back from our thoughts and trying to connect with our core sort of conscious mind, which is just a thing that exists but doesn't really think. It just is. And I do believe that all of us, if we can step into that space of pure kind of consciousness, that it is grounded in kindness and compassion and those values, and that it's just really, the more self-aware we become, the more we become aware of our thoughts and what are the narratives that we're spinning about the particular set of facts or the story that we're telling ourselves. If we can realize that that's the story that we're telling ourselves, that allows other people then to also step back in a way, and connect on that more maybe heart-centered level, or more on just on the level of consciousness. And I think as a lawyer, that's the space that I'm talking about. So maybe there isn't a word for it, but there's something there about accessing that integrative law, practicing law as an integrative lawyer allows me to do, where I don't feel I have to play this role of the lawyer, and what that signifies to people.
I was speaking with actually another guest of this episode last week, and we were talking about the importance of having people feel like they belong where they are, whether it's you belong in the firm, whether you belong in the school or the courtroom, conference room, wherever. And if you don't feel like you belong, then you restrict yourself. And when you restrict yourself, you restrict your contribution, and then that restricts the way that people see you and view you. And I'm thinking that also restricts the problem solving. And so all of this is like the same general theme of we're creating a space where people feel like you belong because you know yourself and your awareness of yourself. And then by being there, if you have that, then I think you naturally are more welcoming and opening to others. Because I've been in conference rooms or in meetings where you just see, where I'm just kind of like, I sit back and I just kind of observe. I worked in one firm, I forget where I was in the conference room. It was like mostly I don't want to have gender stereotyping here, but I was the only female attorney in the room, and I saw a whole bunch of other male attorneys, and I just sat back for a second and watched them, and the different gesturing that they were doing and the body language that they were doing to try to, it almost like a dog over like different territory and stuff. And I noticed all the men would sit back and they would like bring their hands like back behind their chest and open up, and then kind of open up, and as they're turning their chest toward the person next to them, which I remember saying there, like, that's odd that all the men are doing that. What is that about? And they were just like this one's upmanship too, where they're always like doing one up. And I'm thinking that's not one, it made the meeting take a lot longer than I think it needed to take for myself. When you're talking about where you like to see things and efficiently and how they can move smoothly, I'm like, do we really need to spend all this time of chest pounding in a way that, civil society? But anyways, if you come into a space where you're not chest pounding, it creates a space where everyone else can kind of just relax and step into themselves and belong, and then see the solutions, see the magic that happens.
So that's interesting. I'm going to be going to a very large law firm in January for a meeting with a very senior director who is one of those kinds of people, and I'm planning to go in and just be myself and see what happens. And all his gesturing and bullying and posturing actually, if I don't respond to it and don't react to it and just come across as myself, how will that impact on the meeting that we're going to have? So it really is interesting, and I think I mean it is, it's not just a gender thing. There's that masculine normal that's sort of being created, and there are many women attorneys and lawyers who do it as well. And that was, so two things from that. One was in my very early days of that same year when I was doing my articles, and I looked at the women they were lovely people, most of them, but they had to play a game where they had to sort of engage with more masculine kinds of ways of engaging, which wasn't their natural inclination, but they became more masculine almost in the way that they behaved. And I didn't want that to happen to me. So that was one of the reasons why I left. And then the other thing is just about the integrative law movement and belonging, is that I think until I met Kim Wright, until that point, I always felt like I didn't belong in the legal system, and I didn't belong as a lawyer because I was different. But one of my visions for going forward is that the legal system should be a place where people like me feel they belong. And so that's one of the reasons why I support the integrative legal movement and integrative law and all that, because it means that people can belong. You don't have to be a particular way. You can find a way to belong in the system. And also, if you stay in the system, because for many years I thought maybe I should leave and do something different, that wasn't at all involved with law. But I've kind of stuck it out, and now I feel that I'm slightly subversive, because I'm doing these different things from within the system. And I feel as if I belong because I found the integrative legal movement and all those other lawyers who are doing similar things. And we do have common values. That's definitely true of the movement. How they manifest is, very different in the different things that people do. But I think there is a core connection between everyone. And as so far, I've not met an integrative lawyer who I don't have some kind of core connection with on some level. Even if they're very, very different personalities to me and very different kind of lawyer, we find a connection.
There's a connection there.
Yeah.
So if you can, walk me through or share with us what you are doing with Milkwood and some of the things that you are doing as an integrative lawyer and in the integrative movement. Go ahead, and I said some of the things that you're doing it differently. Let's.
Yeah. So initially, Milkwood was born out of my own experiences as a traditional attorney, and particularly with regard to prenups or antenuptial contracts, as we call them in South Africa, and realizing that people were getting married and they had to sign this agreement before they got married. And the law focuses on the beginning of the marriage and the end of the marriage, and nothing else. And my kind of thinking, well, marriages generally end because of stuff that happened in the middle of during the marriage. And people were coming to these consultations not really having had discussions about how their marriage was going to be and what their vision was and what their values were and what their hopes were, and not ventilating issues, particularly around finances, because that's all that the prenup looks at. And then my feelings as well that, marriages can fall apart because of money and conversations that should have happened about finances and that didn't happen. And then there are a few other things as well that in doing divorce work, I saw were the causes of the end of marriages, such as children and different expectations around having children and parenting, financial issues, and then the other one was infidelity, and then perhaps a few other things, but those seem to be the main three. But the financial one was a big thing. And so I started thinking, how could I use this opportunity where people are forced to have a part-way conversation about the finances in their relationship as an opportunity to go a little bit deeper. And because I'm not a religious person, when I got married, we didn't go for counseling or anything in a church or anything like that. So there wasn't really any other kind of option. And so with this, and then also having clients come and thinking, I just don't think this marriage is going to work because they can't even have this conversation, which is before the wedding and everything's good and happy. How are they going to manage when things get stressful? So I approached a psychologist who had previously studied law and said to her, there must be a better way of doing this. And so, and building in the psychology, and also at that time I'd been working on my values and things. So that's kind of how Milkwood started. And then so that was the one aspect, and the other aspect was around wills. And two very close friends of mine who both died 6 months apart of cancer, and I was the executor in their estates. And when I drafted the wills, there were many questions that weren't asked because I didn't feel that there was an elephant in the room about them that they were dying and that they were going to die soon and that they knew they were dying. And I didn't want to say the wrong thing, so I didn't ask the right questions. And in fact, there was so much that was missed in those opportunities about how they wanted the last part of their life to be, what kind of legacy they wanted to leave, what their hopes were for their children. Both of them had children. All those things were lost. And so, again, it was this, well, if you have to talk about your will and your assets and things, maybe it's an opportunity to start talking about other things as well that matter. And from my own experience of death and the death of my parents, the thing that I miss the most about them is not the things that they had or the money that they left me that I might have bought something with. The things that I miss most about them are the stories and their essence. And that gets completely lost when someone dies, unless somebody helps you to try and record it. Or, some people do that, but most people don't think about that kind of thing. And so it was a way of saying, maybe there's an opportunity here to do some more. And I think that's what drives Milkwood, is that there are these opportunities within the legal system or within legal practice, whatever they might be, even in a litigation matter or in some kind of contractual relationship, there's always an opportunity to do more. And I think that's what drove Milkwood, was how do I offer my clients the opportunity to do more? And so that's what Milkwood does. It says, if you want to do a prenup, we will offer you the opportunity to go a bit deeper and to actually talk about your vision and your values and your hopes for your future relationship. And then with the will, if you are doing your will and you're contemplating your own mortality and a world where you won't exist anymore, could we do some more about leaving something more than just your things behind, and maybe some stories, or even just thinking about how you would like to die and what would be a good death for you if you had the opportunity to talk about that. And then again, and so that's where conscious contracts, and then so that's two things that Milkwood does. And then we also do cohabitations agreements, because those fit in very well with the prenups and are a little bit, are connected. And then one of our more recent offerings is conscious parting, which is saying, okay, so the relationship has come to an end and you want to separate and get divorced, but could we do a little bit more about how you wish to go forward in life and move forward from this into future relationships? And how do you want the relationship with the person who you're leaving now to go forward as well, in a way that is of benefit to yourself, rather than leaving you feeling full of hate and anger and those kind of things. And then conscious contracting, which says, okay, so you have to enter into a contract because you're starting a business with someone or you're employing someone, but can we do more? Could we perhaps look at what you're really doing together and how this impacts on the people involved and on the, you know, the community and the planet? So I think, to sum it up, what Milkwood does is it offers the opportunity to do more.
We are taking a brief break from this conversation to ask for your financial support. With each episode, we hope you can see how lawyers and peacemakers like you are contributing to the healing of the world. It takes many kinds of resources for the integrative law movement to keep going and affecting change. Your monetary donation can help us continue this important work by supporting the activities and members of this community. Each contribution goes to promote the stability and accessibility of the movement and to support basic expenses like our mighty network group, web hosting, social media and event management, and this Integrative Lawyers of the World podcast. Because we like to give people choices, we have ongoing monthly options on patreon.com where you can choose a level of participation to match your budget. You can also make a one-time donation through PayPal. Thanks to our non-profit corporate sponsors, the Renaissance Lawyer Society, US supporters are able to make tax-deductible donations. Other countries, check your local tax laws. To help establish confidence in your choices to support us, we have set up an open, collective, transparent plan to track how the community money is spent. For ways to support the integrative law movement and our world-changing work, go to the Integrative Law website at integrativelaw.com and click on Support the Movement tab. Search for Integrative Law on Patreon or use the phrase Integrative Law Financial Support for the Movement in your favorite search engine. Thank you for your support and spending time with us today. Enjoy the rest of this conversation.
And I like how it definitely embodies that holistic value. It's not just, people may think of these things as typically legal things, but there's so much more to it than legal issues. So how can you offer more to help those other areas or those other needs, to give a holistic approach to it? And so I noticed on Milkwood, you describe it as co-creating integrative legal solutions, which I think is aptly describes what you just shared with us. I just want to, so when you co-creating, you mentioned that you work with a psychologist, and are there other people that you bring into your approach as your team that you're helping with these different matters?
Yeah, so the co-creating is about working with the other professionals, but also with the client. So we co-create in that the client helps to create whatever it is. They actually help to create their relationship agreement, their conscious contract, their will is something that they are invested in and they understand, and they have created it with the help of myself and the other professionals. And so our view is that they are the expert in their own lives, and I'm the expert in law, well, in that area, and my colleagues are experts in their areas. And together, we bring all those expertise together to create whatever it is, whatever the legal solution might be it a prenup or a will or a conscious contract. And the people that I work with, so at the moment, I don't do, so initially I worked with Victoria Manor, who's a clinical psychologist, but she's moved on, well, she's so busy in her psychology practice that she's no longer working with Milkwood at the moment. And the people who I work with now are one of the original other people who was at the beginning of Milkwood, who is a woman named Diane Berger, who's a family counselor and a bereavement specialist. And she and I work together in the area of the wills for people who might want to look a bit more deeply at their own life, their own death, and everything around that. And then the other person who I work with is Dr. Lorna Alkers, who's a social worker. And she and I work together on the prenups and the cohabitation agreements and the conscious parting. And she brings the expertise around relationships and the mental health issues and the social work issues. And then the third person who I work with in Milkwood is Jill Farris, who is an adult education specialist and somebody who also worked for many years in the healthcare environment. But she and I work together primarily on developing training around the things that we do, and also for people wishing to become more integrative in their own legal practices. So to develop training for other lawyers or other people working in the legal system. So they don't necessarily need to be lawyers. It can be in anything where those areas that Milkwood focuses on happen. So and so she's an expert in creating trainings, really.
So you're co-creating with them as well, and I like how you described it as co-creating with the client. And I can imagine that goes back to how we were saying, creating space where they feel they belong. They're a part of the process. The process isn't being done to them, but they can help be, they're a part of it, and they are actively choosing how they want it to be for them.
Yes, and also I think that's what traditional lawyers do, is somebody comes to see them and then they provide the solution. Whereas this way, it's actually you help to co-create the solution. And so I think there's more investment by people, and then they see the legal system not as something that doesn't work for them, or that they're afraid of, or is out to is something they can't engage with, because it's this sort of system that nobody really understands except lawyers, and we use these big words and we throw in a bit of Latin just to make it sound like, we really know what we're talking about. And it's very alienating for people. Whereas our approach is to say, come and join us on this journey and bring what you have, and I'll bring what I have, and my colleagues will bring what they have, and then we'll create the solution for you. And Patrick Andrews is one of, a well-known English lawyer who is involved also with integrative law. And he has a lovely way of putting it. He says that one of our skills is that not only do we speak lawyer, we also speak human. And so we can then cross that divide for people, so that we can speak to them in human. We can look at the legal contract and speak lawyer, and then explain it to them in human. And that's something that really guides me, is to try and get people to engage with the legal system and these legal processes that are required. So, everyone knows they ought to have a will. So why not use this as an opportunity to really engage with what is it about? It's about the world after you are no longer in it. And how would you like that to be?
I love how you are incorporating those things in the will, in the antenuptial agreements, meaning the will can be a scary thing. You're focusing on death, right? But we all know that, but you're also giving them an opportunity to choose not just the material things that will be left, but how you said sometimes you open up to discussions. How do you want to live the rest of your life? So let's not just talk about death. We're talking about life and living, and how do you want to be remembered? What stories do you want? I can see that takes a scary, or maybe an often scary topic, and addresses it, but then it opens the door to address more fun things a part of it, more joyful things a part of it.
And also, I really believe, so there's that very old-fashioned, I think it comes from the Catholic Church or maybe before, of a memento mori, a reminder of death. So people used to carry these little charms or symbols, or, like a necklace or something, which was a memento mori. But the point of that was that if we remember that we have this one life, and this is all we get, and nobody's getting out of here alive, it allows you to really live more fully. And so if when people are looking at a document that's talking about when they're not here, they also focus on, well, what are my values, and what do I care about, and how do I want my legacy to live on, that also impacts on how they choose to live their life now. And for me, that's all we have, is this one moment, actually. And so we should be focusing on how do we live now, and how do we do the right, spread kindness and goodness and happiness and fun and those things now, and try and create a better place for people. And it's a bit what we were talking about earlier, about not living in fear, and about living in the moment, and living in that connective space of we are all here together in this experience of life.
In the humankind.
In the humankind.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I just want to, when you're talking about the marriage, the antenuptial agreements and the cohabitation agreements, it reminded me, do you ever watch The Big Bang Theory by any chance?
Oh, I love The Big Bang Theory.
Sheldon and Amy, how he had the relationship agreement, everything was spelled out. It reminds me. And I remember watching at some point, it's funny and it's comedy, but at some point I'm like, oh, that's kind of a good idea for couples to talk about that ahead of time.
Yeah, so in fact when we do our cohabitation or prenup or whatever, or antenup, then we develop a separate agreement, which is often called a relationship agreement. And I always think of The Big Bang Theory. And Sheldon had those with everyone, not just with Amy. And it's a really good thing to do. So I do have a little giggle about that. But it was funny, but it was actually, everyone knew where they stood,
So I said, if you know where you stand, you know what the expectations are. There's not confusion, and when there's no confusion, or the less confusion, the less that you minimize the degree or the number of conflicts that you may happen, or how you solve them when they do.
And then when one brings in the conscious contracting process, or of developing your own conflict resolution mechanism or conflict management mechanism, which conscious contracting does. I don't know how much you know about that, but it's the addressing change and engage in disagreement part. If you build that into your relationship, then when somebody does something wrong, then you've got a way of like, well, how do we deal with that? And so, rather than rushing off to a court, or an outsider to then make a decision for you. And so you can imagine, that's what Sheldon kind of manages to do, is they don't have to go to somebody else to say, this is what you need to do to fix it. He can say, this is what the agreement says, so now how are we going to fix it?
Mm-hmm. One thing I like too, I can imagine if someone is asked to sign a prenup, that seems to focus on what's going to happen when our marriage ends. So like going into marriage, you're thinking about how it's going to end. But adding your process to it says we're not focusing on, it's not an inevitable end that we're focusing on. We're focusing also on how do we want the marriage to be. So I can see that for couples who are struggling to agree whether or not to get the prenup because they don't like the idea of focusing on the end of the marriage, I can see your process as working through that as well, because it gives them a space to focus on the marriage.
Yeah, and I think, and they really love the process.
Yeah.
So we haven't done the process with anyone who
Mm.
hasn't enjoyed it. And that's a weird thing to say about doing your prenup, that you actually enjoyed doing it and you found it helpful. And you, every couple that we've worked with has has taken has really enjoyed it. And that's another thing for me, is like, this makes engaging with the law interesting and enjoyable rather than scary and alienating, which is often how people, and traumatic, which is often how people feel when they engage with the law.
They do. When you work together, when a client comes in for one of these, do they meet with a team, like you and the psychologist or the family counselor as a team? Everyone meets together and works together?
Yes. So, how our process works is, in the initial session, we all meet together. So, we're doing one tomorrow. So, it will be a couple who are planning to get married, myself and Lorna. And we also, we spend a lot more time than a traditional lawyer would spend on something like a prenup. So, our first session is generally 90 minutes, around 90 minutes. And then part of the process is, because the legal stuff is generally relatively simple, um, not necessarily easy, but quite simple. The second session that they have is not with me, is just with the social worker or the bereavement, whatever. In this case, it will be with Lorna. They will have a separate meeting with her to discuss issues around the relationship, where they don't really need my input as the lawyer. Um, Although I'd love to be there, because it's probably the most interesting one. And then we get back together, and then we come back together again with all of us for a sort of signing and celebration, where we sign the prenup. We also sign, if they want to, their relationship agreement or their vision board or whatever it is they've created with Lorna. And we have tea and cake, and we make a little party out of it, because I love parties, and
Yeah,
any excuse to have, a little celebration
I
is,
like it.
I'll take anything. So yeah, I love that kind of, I love celebrating things.
Do you ever have clients come in who are already married, um, and they're not necessarily having conflict, but they say we want to build a foundation for our marriage, even though we started without one, so to speak. We want to build one. Can you work with us on a relationship agreement, and go through that process?
Actually, we haven't had anyone like that yet, but yes, we could definitely do that. So we could work with anyone at any stage in their relationship who wanted to consciously focus on how their relationship is working and how it will work and how they hope it will work. So we do have, so we have, with the conscious parting, that process is not necessarily always aimed at people separating. It may be that it comes out in the initial session that the solution, which they thought of as divorce, is not necessarily the only solution to the issues at hand. And that maybe they weren't aware of various things or other solutions, which might be to actually have some family therapy, but that they don't really want to get divorced. But people jump to that. Well, let's get divorced. But actually, sometimes it's not a divorce that's needed. It's a lot of processing around something that's happened, and but they still love each other and want to be in relationship. So certainly in that process, that could happen. But yeah, I mean, we could work with anyone who wants to create a relationship agreement at any stage.
It sounds like it's an amazing, I just want your words back to you. How can I offer more? And it seems in these processes that you are, in fact, offering more in a holistic way to your clients, and in that aspect to the community as well. Um, and so, One other thing I want to get back to, all of what we're talking about, like the collaboration approach, we were talking about the pillars, two of the pillars of integrative law, authenticity and collaboration. And we see this with the other professionals you work with as well as the clients. Can you share with me your fee structure basis, um, or the fees that you set with the others that you work with? Because I think that is just, it embodies collaboration and our values so well.
So yeah, so so as you mentioned earlier on, I work in a firm. In it's not a traditional law firm. It's a very boutique, small firm, and it's based on very similar values to in my integrative practice, but it does traditional style work. And in that, I have an hourly rate in that firm. And then in Milkwood, when we got to discussing fees and how much we were going to charge people, it became very apparent that my hourly rate for what I did as a lawyer or what I do as a lawyer is much higher than a social worker's hourly rate for offering therapy or a bereavement counselor, which is a third of what I get charged out at. So, and so there were discussions about what should we charge. And so we've ended up, after much discussion and me having to push the others to up their rate, and me decreasing my rate so that we charge the same for our services. And so we have the same hourly rate because I believe that what we offer as a collaborative service is of equal value, even though society out there doesn't see the equality of what we offer. So they see my service as more valuable because I'm offering a legal service than a social worker, because social workers don't get paid as much as lawyers. And for me, that just didn't feel right. So we share the fees equally, except for the bereavement counselor, who I'm still working on because she feels that she can't actually charge as much as I charge. So that and that's something we have to really engage with, because I see her as being more valuable than myself. And it's not about what what's allowed. It's more about what are you offering and what value does it have. So yeah, so I've reduced my fee in Milkwood is lower than my hourly rate through the firm, and then my colleagues have had to increase their fee to match mine in Milkwood. And then if they offer separate services, so sometimes people like to go for some therapy, then they get a different rate than it is through Milkwood. And then on our website, we also I do sometimes also do a barter with people. So I have been paid in clothes, which was wonderful, for doing some work for someone who's a fashion designer. And she said, come and choose some clothes, and that's how she paid me. And we also do, we would never want somebody not to be able to do our process because of financial difficulties when it's something that would really benefit them. So then we are open to discussing a lower rate, or perhaps a way of paying some of it off, or doing a slightly reduced process or something like that. So Milkwood's definitely not driven by money and by making money. That's sort of, we have to charge because otherwise people wouldn't appreciate what we do. So there was a lot of conversation, like what makes people think it's a valuable process but doesn't make it not accessible. Yeah, so it's interesting.
You want it to be accessible, you want it to be value, and you want to honor yourself too. And I think how you organized it really shows you being true to your values, and it's showing up on how you structure your fees and it embodies the collaboration. It embodies the values that you hold, and it just shows how many other things that we do in life are there opportunities for us to show our values. Um, Another one that you shared with me is your values of humanity and how you wanted to live out of love and not fear. And in
Mm.
part of that, you gave an example of um, living in South Africa. Um, do you want to go on about that a little bit?
So yeah, so South Africa is a country, is a beautiful country with the most. I mean, it's just the most amazing people, but it's also a country with a lot of poverty and a lot of political difficulties, corruption, but poverty is the biggest thing here, I think, and there's a huge gap between the rich and the poor, and many people here come live in a fear-based mindset. They are worried that they just their first response to somebody, if somebody, for example, is standing on the side. So we have a lot of people who stand at the traffic lights here and either try and sell you something or beg or something like that. But often they're trying to sell you something as a way of creating some kind of income for themselves. And most, I would say, the majority of people, when they're in their car, they look straight forward and they don't even acknowledge that person. They pretend that they're not there, and that is how they deal with it. And when I decided I wanted to come back to South Africa and live here, people were like, "Well, what about, it's dangerous and you could get mugged and you could get this and you could get attacked." And my feeling was, I refuse to live in fear. First of all, I will not let that control my life, and I will always acknowledge that another person is another person, and that it's just a random thing that could be me. I could have been born into that family and be standing on the side of the road. So how would I feel? I suppose it's about putting yourself in other people's shoes. If I was standing at the traffic light and someone in a car completely blanked me as though I didn't exist. Um, and and so what I do here is everyone that I engage with, I treat them the same way that I would treat if I was seeing a friend. I would acknowledge them and say hello and how are you. I do that with people, everyone I engage with. I make eye contact with them. I see them, and for me, it's a little bit about going through my life here and spreading kind of connection and humanity amongst us rather than living here being afraid, which many people do. And they've had experiences. I've also had negative experiences here. I'm not going to chat about them, but I've had my own negative experiences here, and yet those won't define my life. And I don't make those. I don't see every person as a potential threat, whereas some people do feel like that. Yeah, so it's just about really, that I do believe that once that we create our own experience through the thoughts that we think about things. And so I try and think positive thoughts rather than negative ones.
And I think it's important, like you said, you acknowledge the negative experiences and you don't have to go into them, but you're not ignoring them, but you're also not letting them, or you're consciously choosing, yes, these negative experiences happen, and I can choose how I want my future experiences to be. And those don't necessarily have to dictate how I see the world from this point forward. But that's taking a conscious awareness to have that. And to do
Yeah, they
that.
define me, I think. Those negative experiences don't define me. They are just things that have happened to me. But at my core, I'm not defined by those. And I think I'm not afraid of dying. I'm not afraid of death. I know that my time will come whenever that is. And so I think it allows me to live a little bit more freely, actually.
I bet it
Because,
does.
you know, when it comes, I don't think we can cheat death. And yeah.
There's this song, I think it's, gosh, I'm bad with band names. It might be One Republic, I'm not sure. But the name of the song is I Lived.
Mm-hmm.
And some of the lyrics, and I'm not saying the lyrics verbatim, but it's about all these things happen. And when your moment comes, I hope you can say, I lived. And it goes through all these other things about, I use it with one of them, I teach online English, and I use it with some of my students, and I have them say, what does he mean when he's saying moment? What moment do you think he's talking about? And some of them understand, oh, the moment right before you die, that you can look back at your life and say, I lived. And it seems that's what you're embracing right now, the living fully. And that goes back to your practice and how you work with the wills, helping people to live fully. As we're living, we know that death is going to happen. We're not going to ignore it. We discuss it, but we also discuss life as well. Wonderful.
And Frank Ostaeski from the Zen Hospice Project, he says that death is the great teacher hiding in plain sight. And that's the thing that because we don't want to talk about it and we don't want to think about it, we're actually losing those lessons that if you thought about your death, there's so much you would learn. And the things that he says in that the two most important questions on a person's mind at the end of their life, because he's worked with many people who are dying with a terminal diagnosis of some kind, is, have I loved and was I loved? Have I loved and was I loved? Or have I loved well, actually? Have I loved well and was I loved? And that's actually what people are concerned about when they die, not who's getting the car and who's getting the share portfolio. And so that inspires a lot of my conversations with people around wills is, what would your answers to those questions be? And how do you want to capture that somehow? Yeah.
Do you offer any, with Milkwood, any services toward aging relations? I'm trying to think like conversations between adult children and their elderly parents about, when it's time for the elderly parent to stop driving, when it's time, slowly they get to do less and less and less. And how do the family manage that? Is that something that Milkwood does?
We don't, but that sounds like a really good idea. So we do offer, in our will process, opportunity for people to talk about something like an advanced care plan or an advanced statement. And one of the things we want to do next year is to approach people who work with people with dementia to at the beginning of their diagnosis, so before the dementia has actually started really affecting them, to be able to have conversations around things like, when will you stop driving? When will it be time for you to move somewhere? Where would you like to move? Those kind of conversations that people generally don't have. And so at the moment, I think places like a hospice might offer that kind of service, but most people leave hospices until the very end.
Yeah.
They don't engage with them early on. And then the doctor, sort of oncologist people or memory specialists, geriatric specialists don't have time to have all those conversations. So that is something that we would really love to do and to offer. We haven't done that yet, but it's certainly something that could fall under Milkwood, and it would fall. It kind of does intersect with the law, because there are, advanced statements, living wills, a care plan, powers of attorney, health proxy, various documents that one can put in place that are legal documents, and then have a broader conversation around preferences and practical concerns, which are, so people often will put a power of attorney in place, but then they don't actually know when to act on it because they haven't been given that guidance. So that is something I would love to do more of, and I would love to work with families, and I know in the US, in the elder law, there is a little bit of that where people work and do estate planning with adult children and parents, but it's very focused again on assets and finances and the stuff. And Milkwood is more about the non-stuff, although we deal with the stuff because we have to, but then there's all that other stuff, which is really relationships. I think for me, it's relationships that you're dealing with.
And the estate planning tends to go to the families who go to estate planning attorneys tend to be wealthier families.
Yeah.
So a large part of society are missing out on those conversations and that help. It'd be nice.
And the thing is, no matter how rich you are or how poor you are, those things affect everyone.
They really do.
Yeah, I mean, death is the great equalizer, and the things associated with death and the end of life.
I just saw the time. I kept you over our hour by quite a bit. Let me end with one question. We like to ask this to each of our guests. We kind of got into it here and there, but it's just so I have a nice ending question. What does being an integrative lawyer mean to you?
So I think being an integrative lawyer means to me not thinking so much and not saying I think, and more saying I feel, and around really connecting with all our intelligences. So and saying I sense. So connecting with the gut, the heart, and the head, and using those different types of ways of engaging, different types of intelligences, different ways of connecting with people. For me, that is what being an integrative lawyer is. It's stepping out of the intellectual and embracing the wholeness that our human form and consciousness allows us to have.
You started Milkwood. You are very active in the integrative law movement. What drives you? Why do you think integrative law is important?
So I think it's a little bit about what we said earlier, and I sense that in you as well. It's about wanting to make things better and seeing that things can be better. And I think that's what drives me. It's that there is this system, it's not really working that well, and I've got some ideas about how it could be better. And I suppose underlying that is my belief that we exist in this world as lots of connections and relationships, and that if we knew ourselves better and were more self-aware, then we would have better relationships with each other. And if we all had better relationships, we would then be kinder and nicer and happier. And then if everybody was kinder and nicer and happier, we would live in a better world. So that's kind of what drives me. Is it sounds very idealistic, but to try and create a better system and a better world for everyone to live in, including myself.
It does sound idealistic, and it is. Just because something sounds idealistic doesn't mean it's not real, because that is how the way we make a better world from within ourselves and one person at a time, one community at a time, expanding throughout the world. And so I love your ideal vision. I embrace it, and thank you so much for being part of Integrative Lawyers of the World.
Thank you. It's been a real pleasure to have this conversation with you. Thank you.